The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. My name is Wesley Holmes. I am the Director of Strategy and Development for the Southeast Energy Efficiency Alliance. We appreciate you all joining us today for our start of our webinar series on Introduction to Inclusive Financing for Energy Efficiency. For those of you who are new to SEIA, I will introduce our organization for you. The Southeast Energy Efficiency Alliance is a regional energy efficiency organization serving 11 states across the Southeast, ranging from Virginia down to Florida and westward to Mississippi and Louisiana. Our mission is to ensure that people in the Southeast have the knowledge, resources, and opportunities to optimize energy use. And we envision a future where energy efficiency is a primary driver of a prosperous, healthy, and sustainable Southeast. SEIA has been, as part of our mission, working to expand opportunities in energy efficiency finance across the region. This work began back in 2014 when we worked with the Arkansas State Energy Office to develop statewide energy financing options, which includes work with the North Carolina On-Bill Working Group. We've worked with several of the utilities across the region who are expanding on-bill financing programs, including Roanoke Electric, Ouachita EMC. And this is actually the start of a new initiative on that front to establish a learning circle for inclusive financing. We're very pleased to be able to start this off with a tremendous audience of folks. Just so you know, you are in good company for our attendees. Just a few highlights of folks we have joining us today. We have State Energy Office representation from the state of Arkansas, Georgia, North Carolina, Virginia, and Florida, as well as Public Service Company representatives from Georgia and Arkansas as well. We also have some terrific nonprofit organizations from across the country, including the NAACP, and a number of participants from the Advancing Energy and Opportunity Collaborative, an organization of nonprofits that SEIA is very proud to help organize, who are all working to expand energy efficiency financing opportunities for all populations. In addition to that, we've actually got a pretty impressive national audience joining us, folks from as far away as Colorado, Iowa, Pennsylvania, and folks from New York as well. So we're very pleased to have you join us. Today we'll be joined, well, your presenter will be Holmes Hummel, Dr. Holmes Hummel, the principal at Clean Energy Works. She is a very respected and renowned energy efficiency consultant and program design consultant that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. She will be taking us through the presentation today, which is intended to provide kind of an overview of inclusive financing options through on-bill programs. So for many of you on the line who have a lot of experience with this, some of this will be some of a refresher. We also have a number of organizations on the line that this is new material for. We're looking forward to answering all of your questions over the course of this series. Just as a reminder, this is a 6-part series, and this is just the beginning. So all of those questions you have about kind of the tough implementation side and technical questions, we're going to get to those over the course of this series. But please feel free to highlight those in some of your questions, and that'll help scope some of our future presentations as we move forward. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Hummel. I'm going to give her control, and she's going to take you through what we have laid out today.
Wesley, thank you very, very much. I appreciate the invitation, and it has been very exciting to collaborate with SEIA on the launch of this series. For all of you who've chosen to join us today, this is the Introduction to Inclusive Financing for Energy Efficiency, where we're going to start at the very beginning, making the case for inclusion in the clean energy economy and why it's important to overcome the barriers that have excluded too many for so long. We're going to look specifically at the solution set known as tariffed on-bill programs because of the success we've seen in the field compared to other on-bill financing approaches. And we'll look at some of that field results briefly today, but you can look forward to the next session, which will feature 3 program operators all speaking from their own experience. We'll close with a preview of those future sessions and invite you to submit as many questions about today's material or the future sessions as you could want, and Wesley will moderate us till the time is closed. So let's begin. We'll start with making the case for more inclusive solutions for energy efficiency, in particular in the clean energy economy. Most of you, I think, are well aware that energy efficiency can provide cost savings for those who can pay for it up front. And in fact, that's one of the biggest challenges that energy efficiency advocates face when they try to persuade people to invest in the resource. The trade-off is that people need to pay up front for a long-term saving streams in the future. And for people who are not even sure that they'll be in the same place 10 years from now, that's a bet that they sometimes don't have enough confidence to place. So we have a large body of work in the electric power sector to mobilize public resources from different revenue streams, but often ratepayer-funded programs are identified with the type of incentives that we offer to induce people to make that investment, because we know it is actually cost-effective, and so we reduce the upfront cost by offering rebates. What we see in the field is that after all the rebates and the public funds are applied, customers still face options to pay for the balance. They need to pay for the balance up front with cash, or find some source of credit if they don't have the cash on hand. So we use ratepayer funds or public funds to buy down those upfront costs, offering rebates to customers to make it easier for them to come up with the balance. But they still have to come up with the balance. And for people who are interested in the residential sector, a whole home energy retrofit could actually identify thousands of dollars of cost-effective upgrades. But few people have thousands of dollars on hand. And as a result, the majority of people decline the upgrades, even after they've been presented evidence that it's cost-effective for them to make the investment. What we're looking at today is a source of relief to that upfront cost barrier that allows us to replace the cash or credit requirement with financing that leaves the customer with a much more approachable picture, where incentive payments up front remove the upfront cost barrier entirely, while still allowing the customer to benefit from immediate net savings from the first year, and also allowing the source of capital for that upfront cost to be able to recover it. This is the nature of a tariffed on-bill program, and we'll talk about it more in a moment, but I've just used jargon, the word tariff. That's because it's not a loan. Here's what happens when we move forward with on-bill programs that require loan-based financing. You're familiar with them. People who will ask, are you a homeowner? Do you have a good credit score? And do you have solid income? We need you to be able to prove to us that you have met our criteria for taking a risk on your credit worthiness before we can offer you debt to finance the solution that you can't otherwise afford. It's such an uncomfortable conversation that most people won't approach it. And even when they do, they find out that they're not eligible, and that becomes discouraging. So the majority of people could be eligible for a cost-effective energy efficiency upgrade will find that the barriers to financing complicate their path to achieving the savings. In the United States, this is not a small problem. Half of all households under the median income are not homeowners. And there, of course, people are not homeowners above the median income as well. Altogether, more than a third of all U.S. households are in homes that they don't own, and therefore their willingness to take out a loan and take on debt on behalf of the landowner from whom they rent, that incentive is not there. That split incentive is a second major barrier that affects our field. In the American South, we have a special sensitivity to the persistence of poverty and the prevalence of poverty. This is a picture from the most recent census that was produced by the Rural Assistance Center. And the heat wave that you see in the American Southeast, the region that's tended by the Southeast Energy Efficiency Alliance, of course, that's a heat wave that hasn't broken in 100 years. And therefore, people who are interested in making sure that energy efficiency investment opportunities are open to all can find that there are problem solvers in the American South who are really ahead in their thinking about how to find applicable solutions. That's why I'm proud to be sponsoring with SEIA this series, because the leaders nationally are found in the southern states. And we're going to introduce in this session the important basics that you might be able to use to introduce the concepts to other parts of the country or to other communities that haven't yet received the benefit of the opportunity. So let's turn attention to tariffed on-bill programs and how they work. I'm going to use the phrase pay as you save, has a handy acronym called PAYS, to describe the system that utilities have used to offer all customers access to cost-effective energy efficiency upgrades using the proven investment and cost recovery model that benefits both the customer and the utility. And that's based on a tariff. The tariff is a legal agreement between a utility and a customer, a terms of service agreement. So let's see how it applies not to the sale of electricity, but to the investment in energy efficiency upgrades. Here in this diagram, you'll see how a utility can draw in low-cost capital from its existing sources of capital and make investments that are delivered by solution providers that consumers choose. Those upgrades that are invested in by the utility are then associated with the utility's meter. And the utility is able then to recover its costs with a charge on the bill that is less, significantly less, than the expected savings. And the customer pays the service charge for that cost recovery over time until such time as all the costs are recovered. This is the basic picture of a tariffed on-bill program and its transaction path. I'm going in the next image to expand this slightly, because you might be familiar with utilities who say, we're good at being a utility, but we really don't know how to mobilize distributed energy solution providers. We're not in the business of delivering energy efficiency upgrades, as contractors might be. So in this next image, I want to introduce the concept of a program operator in the same diagram, where the utility is retaining the services of a program operator that runs their energy efficiency investment program with competitive solution providers providing cost-effective solutions. An example of this would be the Upgrade to Save program at Roanoke Electric in North Carolina. And here I'm showing the exact same diagram with Roanoke Electric's name put in the blue hexagons, as well as their source of capital, which is the United States Department of Agriculture's Rural Utility Service program called Energy Efficiency Conservation Loan Program. Now that may be a relatively unique combination, but it's important and powerful, and the precedent that Roanoke has set in combining that source of capital with an inclusive financing solution has been very powerful for their customers and members. Roanoke has forged a partnership with a program operator, the Roanoke Center, which then relates to the local contractors to engage their customers and deliver solutions. Roanoke Electric and the Roanoke Center are among those that are invited to present on the next part of this series to tell you more about their experience. But moving on with the introduction of the concept, I want to impress the following 4 points, because these are the bedrock bottom lines of a pay-as-you-save offer, where pay-as-you-save is the system upon which the utilities have chosen to implement their tariff-based agreement. First, the customer is given the opportunity to accept energy-saving upgrades that are installed in their home or their building without paying anything up front. The utility pays for the installed energy solution. It's not a charity program, though. The utility does get to recover its costs, and it does so by putting a fixed charge on the electric bill that is significantly less than the estimated energy savings from the upgrades. The customer that's participating takes on no debt. They don't sign a loan. They don't have a lien. They are only obligated to continue to pay their utility bills, their lower utility bills, and to live or reside in a more comfortable building or home. When the utility is finished recovering its cost, the program service charge and the obligation to pay it ends, and the upgrades belong to the building. If you leave this location any sooner, the customer is told, that's fine. You don't have any forward obligation after your period of taking service from the utility is over. And if the utility if the utility's investment should fail, if the equipment should break down and it's not repaired, the service charge also ends, as the customer should not be charged for services it's not receiving. These are the tenets of the pay-as-you-save system, and they have been approved by commissions in multiple states: Kansas, Kentucky, and Arkansas, just to name a few, with oversight boards in California, in North Carolina as well. I believe New Hampshire's commission has also approved an inclusive financing tariff based on the system. It's a short document written in plain language, and later in the series we'll go into it in more detail. But for now, I want to turn attention from how it works to the results that we've seen in the field. This section is going to allow us to look at those results in comparison to debt-based options that are more familiar and more prevalent in the on-bill financing space. First, we'll look at an example transaction. This one taken from Kentucky, where the HouseSmart Kentucky program is offered by MESED in conjunction with 6 different electric utilities who are all members of the East Kentucky Power Cooperative. Now, we're looking here at an example that's a single-story family home upgraded with insulation, air sealing, and a heat pump. This particular example is from a place that must have been an energy guzzler, because the amount of cost-effective investment there was large compared to the average project size that we see in the field, which is typically closer to $7,000. But I've used an example here that starts with a $10,000 investment because it gives us some conveniently round numbers. So, over the course of the expected life of these particular upgrades, and with the cost of capital that's available to the utilities, routinely much lower than what would be available to consumers if they were to go to the credit markets and seek unsecured consumer credit. And with the investment the utilities made on those terms and the customer's cost of electricity without assuming any escalation in the future, just using today's prices, the estimated savings here were $100 a month. So the cost recovery charge by the utility was in the order of $70 a month, leaving the customer with $30 a month of net cash flow, which is 30% of the savings that were expected from the investment. The energy savings here are quantified in thousands of kilowatt hours a year. And while, again, I want to stress that this example is featured as a round numbers example, and it's larger than what you would see in a typical residential space, you see the dimensions of the transaction. Those of you who are familiar with energy efficiency and financing will say, gosh, this just looks a lot like a loan. Aren't you just talking about another form of a loan? And the answer is, well, it is similar in terms of the profile of the transaction, but it is substantially different than a loan. A loan depends on a promissory note. It assigns a personal debt obligation to a borrower. The pay-as-you-save system that implements a tariffed on-bill program does no such thing. The tariff-based terms don't impose a debt obligation. So here you'll see where the two different approaches are alike and also where they are different. Most significantly, because the investment is qualified based on the cost effectiveness of the upgrades and not the credit worthiness of the customer, renters are eligible, as are any other customers regardless of their credit score or their income. There's no credit score check, no debt-to-income ratios to disqualify the participants. But there are some stricter standards for what types of investments can qualify. In particular, these investments have to be better than bill neutral. They can't just be an even balance between costs and benefits. They need to deliver net benefits from the beginning. It's also important to note that the tariff-based terms are similar to the terms of other tariff-based services that the utility will offer its customers, including, I'll bring to your attention here, the third line from the bottom that points to disconnection for non-payment. In some circles of consumer advocacy, disconnection for non-payment is a very uncomfortable element to include in any agreement, because who wants to be disconnected? But I want to speak to this point here briefly, and we will dwell on it more in the third session, to point out that disconnection for non-payment is a part of all the tariff terms that utilities offer for their standard service, and those procedures are well known and in place in each service area. But there's no utility that's offering tariffed on-bill financing today that has reported ever needing to use disconnection for non-payment, which stands to reason. The participants that enroll in these programs are actually experiencing lower utility bills and should experience also then less economic distress might cause them to be delinquent or at jeopardy of disconnection. Let me keep the pace up by moving on and returning to a previous image that I shared with you about the predicament that we find customers are placed in when they don't have good options for addressing the upfront cost barrier. Here you'll see what we typically do to try to make things easier for the customer, and with the introduction of tariffed on-bill financing to be more inclusive, a customer that receives a pays offer or an offer for utility investment in cost-effective upgrades is benefiting from the utility's ability to tap billions of dollars in low-cost capital. And that is actually a loan that the utility takes on in order to make direct investments in cost-effective distributed energy solutions. The pay-as-you-save system and the tariffed on-bill programs that use it for implementation return big benefits to the utilities as well in the form of participation in these programs that generate net streams for the utility. I want to explain how that works here. Compared to a loan-based program for building efficiency upgrades, the utilities program actually covers almost double the scale of the market segment just by bringing in people who are landless or renters or wouldn't qualify for debt-based financing. So there's a larger addressable market for the program the utility is already offering. And the rate at which people accept the offer is much higher than the rate at which they accept an offer of debt. And when they say yes to projects that are bigger and go for deeper savings because the risk profile is so much more favorable. Those first three factors are actually multiplying factors. If you have double the number of customers that are eligible and they accept 5 times as often to project sizes that are double the deal size, you're looking at an order of magnitude increase or more in the amount of capital and therefore the amount of commensurate savings. All this, meanwhile, with an even lower exposure to losses in the form of debt defaults or charge-offs for unpaid bills that the utility might be exposed to. So to recap here, you're looking at a program that has the kinds of qualities that reduce risk for both the utility and for the customers. And the utilities benefit from having accelerated deployment of capital includes things like diminished exposure to their peak costs at the period of time when their energy supply is the most expensive. I'm going to continue to move us towards our close with a look at the American South and where we've seen some important precedents. Most recently, we saw in the state of Arkansas a best practice loan on-bill program called HELP replaced with a tariff-based, more inclusive program called HELP Pays. They reported with a document that you'll see a link to at the bottom of this slide that within the first 4 months of their program, they already saw that they had double the number of customers enrolling, and more than a third of them were residents in multifamily rental housing, which previously was a group of people that had been categorically excluded from access to their energy efficiency financing program. Again, one that had already been acknowledged as a best practice energy efficiency on-bill loan program by the Department of Energy at last year's Better Building Summit. Now, among those customers that received assessments, they were interested in the upgrades, 100% of the multifamily rental units and more than 80% of the other customers said yes. These are astronomically high acceptance rates compared to other financing offers. And the utility reported that the average scale of the project was double what it had been from their loan-based program. Well, double the number of customers and double the project size does get you quadruple the scale of capital deployment. All this reaching $1 million of transaction activity in one area surrounded by persistent poverty in southern Arkansas in just 4 months. We see the accumulated effects of those kinds of program performance metrics when you look at older programs, this one called HouseSmart in Kansas, that is run by Midwest Energy. They've been running the program for years, enough to accumulate more than 1,400 investments. And they've been able to show that, in fact, more than half of the customers accept the offer when presented. Their average investment size is a little bit smaller than what we've observed in states in the American South, Kentucky, Arkansas, and North Carolina in particular, but cumulatively, they've reached millions of dollars of investment, and over 8 years, they've been able to report that they have less than 0.1% charge-off on the whole portfolio. Friends, that is a risk exposure that is superior to the electric service that they actually provide to their mainline business. They charge off more money each year for unpaid bills for electricity than they do unpaid bills for energy efficiency. And of course, the utility then gets to claim the savings that have been achieved by the program they offer, and here they have them expressed in energy terms as well as carbon terms. I'm introducing here a map of the whole United States, and not just the American South, to make a picture about leadership in the American Southeast. I told you about Midwest Energy in Kansas moments ago. That's actually an electric cooperative that's on the west side of Kansas. What you may not know about the electric cooperatives is that they cover 40 million Americans who buy $40 billion of electricity every year. And among them, more than 90% of the persistent poverty counties in the United States are served by electric cooperatives. So if you were looking for utility executives that are serious about inclusion in the energy economy, you'll find them in this segment of the power sector. What you'll also find is that among them, there's leadership in rural communities for inclusive financing, and more so in the American South. You'll see that after Kansas had introduced its program more than a decade ago, it was introduced to eastern Kentucky, a coal fields area that has experienced persistent poverty for quite some time. And following the success of the introduction of tariff on-bill financing with the HouseSmart Kentucky program, we found that Roanoke Electric on the east side of North Carolina was able to find similar success with an on-bill loan program that practically couldn't serve more than a handful of customers in a year to a program that had a wait list of more than 150 customers within the first month of operation. And more recently, Ouachita Electric in southern Arkansas has already published some of its early results. Today's program was designed to introduce you to the concept of inclusive financing, why it's important, how it works, who has it, and what their experience is to date. But we'll be able to do more of that with the future sessions. The next one coming up being a feature of the 3 program operators that I've even referenced today. The program operator from HouseSmart Kentucky, from Upgrade to Save in North Carolina, and Help Pays in Arkansas. You can sign up for that session now, but you don't need to wait to ask hard questions about how the system works or how it could work where you are. I do want to make sure that you can appreciate then that some of your hardest questions may be addressed in subsequent sections of the series, one where we anticipate some of your interests by dedicating entire sessions to going in depth to the financial modeling or sourcing capital or engaging consumer protections. That said, I want to invite all of you to use the webinar system to enter as many questions as Wesley can sort through, and we'll use the balance of time we have today to address them. The series sessions that are in blue here are segmented out specifically because I also want you to know that there's additional assistance available to those of you who join SIA's Learning Circle, an affinity group that SIA will form following the second session among those of you that have projects that you want to pursue related to introducing inclusive financing or making it better if you're hailing from a place where it already exists. The following slide, which Wesley you may have control to advance, will allow you to see our anticipation. These first two sessions are designed to make sure everyone has a common playing field for understanding the concepts and explaining them to other people. And the following more advanced topics are ones where we'll have a learning circle that's supported with additional technical assistance, and everyone who participates in the introductory sessions can join. The real eligibility that you be able to articulate a project of yours that would further your interest in expanding the use of inclusive financing. Wesley, who's our moderator today, is accepting inquiries, and he'll be managing the invitations and open invitations for participation in that learning circle. So with that, Wesley, I'd like to invite you to turn our attention to the questions that people may have and what we may be able to do in the balance of time of this hour to help those who have joined us from all over the country with an interest.
Thank you, Holmes. And folks, if you do have any questions, just a reminder down in the control panel on the side of your screen, you have enter questions via text. We'll start working through a couple of ones that immediately popped up. We'll just go ahead and get out of the way. As Holmes noted, we will be providing a recording of the webinar to everyone. So if you've had any questions with audio or you had to step away for a second, we will be providing that to all of the attendees. I'm going to scroll down through and look through some of the questions here. All right, so first question was, can you compare the impact of PAYS to the benefits of PACE?
Oh, certainly, and that's a good one. We will be looking at three to here. The Property Assessed Clean Energy Program, which has the acronym PACE, is one that imposes a senior lien, and in some states that's not allowed, so it's a junior lien, on the property, and then recovers the cost through the taxes that are assessed to the owner of that property. Two things that are important to note is one, that as you might imagine, immediately anybody who doesn't own property is not eligible to participate in that program, though they may benefit from it if they can persuade their landlord to use the PACE program to finance upgrades that would lower the renter's bill. Here we run into the split incentive program problem, where renters who pay bills enjoy savings, but then they may face higher rents in order to allow the landlord to recover the cost of the increased property taxes. So with regard to inclusion, which is the main theme of this session, that is the most important point of distinction. There's a place in the United States where we have both property assessed clean energy and inclusive financing based on the pay-as-you-save system operating well. It's actually in Sonoma County, where PACE has been underway for some time. And the executives in Sonoma County tell us that having inclusive financing for energy efficiency upgrades has been important to serve customers that wouldn't be eligible or wouldn't be able to persuade their landowners to make investments through their Property Assessed Clean Energy program. There's also something else I should note, which is the consumer protections that are included in the pay-as-you-save system for tariffed on-bill financing are not often found in the Property Assessed Clean Energy programs. The two that are most important in particular is, one is that there's no guarantee that the charges for cost recovery will be less than the estimated savings in a Property Assessed Clean Energy program. There's no pledge or assurance that that's the dimension of cost effectiveness applied to the investment. And also, when a person should move away from their location, in a pay-as-you-save system, the tariff continues to apply automatically to the next customer at that site. And in the Property Assessed Clean Energy program, we've seen mixed results with whether or not customers that have liens on their property are able to maintain those liens and have them continue to be imposed on successor customers once they sell that property to the next buyer. Perhaps I've spent too long on that, Wesley, but it's such a big topic. I'm glad you prioritized the question.
Yeah, and thank you, Holmes. It is definitely a common question because of the perceived similarities between those two models. Another question we have here is, well, there's two questions in this question. So one, could something like the PAYS model be applied to something like electric vehicles? And another part to that question is, could the PAYS model be used between large customers, per se a municipality and the utility?
Those are great questions. I want to start with the second one first by pointing out that there already is good precedent for municipal governments participating in and benefiting from a tariffed on-bill program, such as the Municipal Smart Start program offered in New Hampshire. New Hampshire, which is served primarily by a for-profit utility called Eversource, has reported more than 500 investments in upgrades to municipal buildings, millions of dollars of upgrades with millions of dollars of savings, and as I understand it, 0% charge-offs, meaning they've recovered every dime that they've invested. That's a highly successful model and one worth attention. But wherever you think that tariffed on-bill financing can benefit a municipality, it can probably benefit the businesses in that municipality and the customers that are in the residential sector as well. So there's no need to think about the program as being limited to municipal customers. Now, municipal customers often are in possession of large fleets of heavy-duty vehicles, particularly if they're in urban areas that provide mass transit. That's where I want to answer your first question, because it is true that we may be able to use tariffed on-bill financing for the premium cost of highly energy-efficient upgrades to electric buses in places where diesel buses are otherwise the choice of the day by the local transit authority. In the United States, we finally have a manufacturer who's able to deliver the electric buses that we need on the performance parameters that bus transit companies require, and to do so in a way that's cost-effective in a life cycle sense. So we're likely to see the first applications of tariffed on-bill financing to electric bus fleets. From there, you can see how we might be able to proceed to other types of fleets, including school bus fleets, or even fleets that are used for other commercial purposes, and eventually all the way down to individual vehicles.
Thank you, Holmes. Another question here. What is the role of a homeowner in the case where it is a rental property?
That's an excellent question, because as I sometimes have quipped, it's typically frowned upon to go make changes to someone's property without getting their approval first. And so since that's such a statement of the obvious, the tariffed on-bill programs that utilities offer certainly require that a renter obtain landlord approval, or the utility and their program operator helps the renter by engaging directly with the landlord to assure everyone that the upgrades that are being made to the building are approved of and accepted by the landlord. This has not been reported as a barrier by any utility that offers the program. And landlords in the case of Arkansas actually sought and actively participated in the program. They even paid for all the co-payments that were needed to make sure that every renter in their building would have an eligible, cost-effective project. Let me put that in more clear terms, and you may hear about it in our next session from the program operator in Arkansas. But what they did when they engaged the landlords was gain cooperation in terms of their outreach to renters that were in those buildings. And the landlords made sure that every renter in their property had an offer if it was cost effective. And if the offer wasn't going to be cost effective, the landlord put in a little bit of money to make sure that it would be. That's called a co-payment. In the end, the landlords put in 4% of the money, and they got 25 times that in terms of the capital that was available from the utility for the investments and the resulting cost-effective upgrades. That's an important story I'm sure we'll return to again next month.
Great. Now, next question is related to ECLIP, and they want to know, what is the limit for utilities to borrow from ECLIP? And a follow-on to that, is there any concerns for future administration to possibly limit the availability of funding through that mechanism?
You bragged on the attendance of this session earlier, Wesley, but I will tell you these are some of the most excellent questions I've received in any of these types of sessions. I've offered many. The ECLIP program, which refers to the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Loan Program, is a financing facility that's available to utilities that serve rural areas. And so it's not surprising that the utilities that make most use of this financing are the rural electric cooperatives that I introduced earlier with a map of the United States colored in pastel shapes. And the coverage in the southern states is about 10 million households. These are not inconsequential characters in the federal politics of America's energy economy. And the rural electric cooperatives have done very well to defend their interests, including the financing that's available to them at Treasury rates from the Rural Utility Service. The scale of that financing facility is $5 billion with a B, $5 billion every year. And even when it's not fully used in 1 year, it's often reauthorized with $5 billion the next year. At this multi-billion-dollar scale, the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Loan Program's deep well of low-cost financing is functionally unlimited in terms of its availability to utilities that qualify to borrow from the Rural Utility Service. Now, there are, of course, practical limits to how much a utility may want to borrow, but that's different than the amount that's available, which is, in my view, functionally unlimited compared to what utilities would typically seek. That said, the second part of your question is about whether or not a future administration may find any interest in Congress in changing the terms upon which the Rural Utility Service is able to offer financing that's been available to America's rural electric cooperatives since the 1930s. And I think actually it's important to underscore that that's the answer also at the same time. Since the 1930s, through every different type of administration and every different type of disposition at the federal level, the Rural Utility Service's federal financing program has been one of the most successful and high-performing financing programs in the federal government and in the history of the federal government. I think there's high confidence from a bipartisan perspective there will remain support for that program.
Yes, thank you, Holmes. So the next one of the questions here is, do all states have laws that allow for a tariffed on-bill financing program?
Wesley, I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to repeat that question as my phone just made you silent there for a few seconds.
The question is whether or not all states could you do a tariff program in any state? Do they all have laws that permit this kind of program?
That's an excellent question, too, about legal reviews. So as you've probably already seen, commissions in places like Kansas, Kentucky, New Hampshire, and Arkansas have already undertaken legal reviews and found favor in approving the tariffed on-bill programs that have been proposed to them. There's no example in any of the other states where inclusive financing has been introduced through municipal utilities or electric cooperatives that aren't subject to utility commission approval. There hasn't been found an instance in which there's a legal challenge or a legal basis for declining to pursue the tariffed on-bill proposal that someone may be moving through a utility to their governing board, to their city council, or to another regulatory body other than a utility commission. So there hasn't yet been a precedent for a legal challenge to tariffed on-bill financing. And let me just point out that what we're looking at is using a business model that's been reaffirmed repeatedly in all 50 states as utilities use a very familiar, proven business model of making investments and recovering their costs through a terms of service agreement that's using the legal instrument of a tariff. That's the basis upon which this system was designed. And so the affirmation of the utility doing business in a way that it's done business for quite some time on tariff-based terms is what gives us the precedent for making a small adaptation to the concept of making the energy infrastructure they're able to invest in extend to the customer side of the meter, where we now find a vastly expanding suite of cost-effective solutions, but without extending the utility's monopoly on that side of the meter, where the customer is coming up with the cost recovery and ultimately retains ownership of the assets that are financed in the investment.
Thank you. Now there's a couple of questions here, I guess, speak to a similar question around accessibility for folks. So I'm going to try to combine these two. So the question is essentially, are there examples of this program model working outside of a utility structure? Say an investor-owned utility isn't willing to make the program available, or could the model work through a structure such as a green bank?
That's a very good question, and I think I do need to defer that question just because of its nuances and details, all the many different dependencies, to one of our sessions, including one that's called the source of capital question, because there are different ways that the utility can decline to be involved while still allowing inclusive financing to be introduced in their service territory. And this relates to arrangements that we've already seen introduced in states like, well, for example, the state of New York, where the state allows the utility to essentially become an agent to the energy efficiency financing program that's being conducted by a third party. That particular program is currently based on loan terms, and so they disqualify renters and low-income folks pretty routinely from that program. But you could imagine how it could be reformed or revised with more inclusive terms and still take advantage of that arrangement.
Okay. Well, that brings us to the end of the questions submitted on the document. If anybody has any other additional ones before we close, feel free to drop those in real quick.
Wesley, I'd like to take the opportunity to ask everyone who's with us, and I've noted by watching the webinar statistics that more than 95% of the people who joined us at the beginning of the hour are still with us now. That by itself is somewhat extraordinary by the experience of how these sessions go. That signals to me a kind of interest that's of interest to SEIA, I know, and to Clean Energy Works, which is if here at the close you have a moment to turn attention to the questions bar on your screen, it would be important for us to get some feedback from the listeners about your interests in introducing more inclusive clean energy solutions in the places where you work, or through the programs that you're familiar with, or through the different organizations that you're involved in. It would help us inform and shape the future content. If you don't expect us to answer these questions in the next 4 or 5 minutes, just write in a statement about your interests in inclusive tariffed on-bill financing and why you decided to join us in a way that will help us serve your interests better the next time we reconvene.
Thank you. That's an excellent point, and we'll keep the questions bar open. While I'm doing that, I'll just address one of those key questions everybody had at the outset, which is regarding the availability of this webinar's recording following the session. So I will go to the next slide just to show you. This webinar is being recorded, and it will be uploaded to SIA's website. And as soon as it is uploaded, we will send out an email to all registrants letting you know that it is available to be downloaded. SIA's website is seaalliance.org. That's www.sealliance.org. And there is a resources page link within that page that has all of our available webinars that we've ever provided listed there, and this will be right at the top when it's available. If anybody has any follow-up questions, or if you're unable to get your comments, thoughts, or questions that you'd like to see addressed in the future webinar series, feel free to email those directly to me. My information is provided in the webinar link itself, or in the slide deck that we will be sending out, and we'll be sure to incorporate that into our future presentations. And so with that, Holmes, unless you have any other parting thoughts you'd like to share, I just want to thank everybody very much for joining us. This has been a terrific session with fantastic attendance. I just want to say we are thrilled to have so many talented people from such a broad array of experience and diversity of organizations and diversity of places who are interested in expanding energy efficiency financing resources for our communities. It's very heartening to see that, and we look forward to working with you all as we move forward. So with that, we will close out the webinar, and I thank you for your attendance.